When the Maxwell leaderboard first released, I was able to hold rank 1 with mages, but unfortunately I had to stop pushing. In that time, after I stopped pushing, the leaderboard became dominated by Golem players until a new tech was discovered that took mages to another level. The mage clears immediately jumped up 5 rifts when this tech was discovered, and you can see in the final leaderboard of mages are got all the way up to a 127, which is the same as the highest Golem clear. Unfortunately, the Golem clears were a few seconds faster, but you can see Shadow Mages are incredibly competitive with Golem. And you might be wondering, if Golem and Shadow Mages are so close, why is everyone starting to swap to Shadow Mages? Well, the reason is because the build is just so much tankier. It is so much easier to play as well because you don't have to be spamming the Golem active, which means you can sit in Blood Mist, you can spam Raise Skeleton, and overall, it's just an easier to play build that's much less punishing, but can still do ludicrous damage and still has the exact same ceiling as Golem. This build is incredibly powerful, it is easy to play, and it is very easy to get online. So how can one new tech double the damage of a build, and what were the whole setups that everybody was playing to clear those 127s? Well, the new tech was simply just the aphotic aspect. This aspect is ludicrously powerful, it turns out, because of a bugged interaction with Abhorrent Decrepify. Bugged, not bugged, call it what you want. But at the end of the day, what's happening is, while your Skeletal Warriors are empowered, they're going to do shadow damage, as long as you're in the aphotic aspect, right? And this is actually going to cause their auto attacks to proc Decrepify. This means that you are going to be constantly reducing the cooldown on all of your skills, giving you absurd uptime on Blood Mist, absurd uptime on Army of the Dead, and absurd uptime on Corpse Tendrils. This literally more than doubles our single target damage, and in AoE, it's about a 50% damage increase, something like that. So the end result is a build that does crazy damage. It's able to sit in Blood Mist anytime it needs to. It's almost always up. And we have the permanent Army of the Dead in single target, meaning this build absolutely shreds bosses. I'm telling you guys, this build is absolutely crazy. You cannot go wrong playing this. And you can see that because, 5 days ago, there was just me playing mages on the leaderboard. And today, so many mages are on the leaderboard. I think 3 or 4 out of the top 10 are now playing mage. And more people are swapping to mages every day. This build is the new meta for Necromancer, and I highly recommend you play it. So, let's get into exactly how the build works, and give you all of the information that you need to crush everything playing the best Necromancer build in the game. Let's start by talking about the gear, because there's been a few optimizations that massively increase your damage. The first one is that we are going to be running the Unyielding Commander's aspect on the amulet. This is going to give us nearly 100% uptime on a 150% damage multiplier, allowing this build to just obliterate everything, right? Because, we get all the uptime because they Abhorrent Decrepify with the aphotic aspect, so you really want this on your amulet. As part of that, we're moving the aspect of Frenzy Dead to a ring, which you might be thinking, well, isn't Cult Leader super important? Like, how are we still getting to 100% attack speed for this massive 150% damage multiplier? Well, the answer is that it becomes extremely important that you get attack speed on both your rings, you need attack speed on your gloves, and potentially you might want attack speed on your amulet if you're still not at cap, but basically you just need to get attack speed rolls on as many pieces of gear as you can so that you can still meet the attack speed requirement while running the Unyielding Commander's aspect on your amulet. Now let's get into the gear and start talking about the different aspects and the different stats that you need for this build to just crush. It is very important on our helmet to get cooldown reduction with a greater affix. The reason for this is basically uptime on Army of the Dead in single target. Now, cooldown reduction is not very good in AoE, but it is extremely good in single target because every point of cooldown reduction you get means more uptime on Army of the Dead. You can potentially cap out where your Army of the Dead is already up 100% on single target, but that is really hard to do, and I would be very impressed if you managed to do that. So you definitely want the G8 cooldown reduction. Now you can also see I've got armor and a total armor roll on my helmet, and that's just to get to the armor cap. You can do this on boots, you can do it on your legs, it doesn't matter which slot you do it on, just get to armor cap. On your chest piece, we're running Tyrael's Might. Now the most important thing with Tyrael's Might is this maximum resistance to all elements, right? If you can get this G8, that would be perfect, but you're never going to get it, right? But what's really important is that you try to masterwork it. It's okay to masterwork the damage reduction as well, but the resistance to all elements is the most important thing. On gloves, we're looking for attack speed, crit chance, and skeletal mage mastery. This is going to represent a gigantic damage multiplier. And then we're going to be running the aspect reanimation, and then we're going to be tempering on skeletal mage damage and corpse tendril size. Remember, Corpse Tendril size is capped at 100%, so you only need 2 rolls of Corpse Tendril size before it is capped out, and at that point, the other utility options aren't as good. But just remember, you don't have to get Corpse Tendril size in your gloves. If you get, attack speed, crit, Skeletal Mage Mastery gloves with Skeletal Mage damage, great. And if you happen to also get Corpse Tendril size, that's awesome. But you can also get Corpse Tendril size from other pieces of gear, like my pants. Which, on your pants, you want Int, Max Life, Skeletal Mage Mastery, and then you're looking for a Max Life Tempering and a Corpse Tendril size Tempering, and on our pants, we are running the Bloodgetters aspect. This Bloodgetters aspect is going to continuously pump up our health. We're going to get a continuous stream of healing, and on top of that, it's also going to give us a 21% damage multiplier that does carry through to our minions. So we're able to run a offensive aspect and a defensive slot, which is pretty nice. One thing I will say, though, this build does sometimes struggle with survivability, especially in hard content. Even though it's tankier than Golem, Necro is still a very squishy class, okay? So one of the things that you can do, if you're struggling with survivability, just swap the Bloodgetters for Hardened Bones, and you're going to get 25% survivability, which is a ton, okay? So don't feel like obligated to play Bloodgetters. If you need to, feel free to swap the Hardened Bones. On our boots, we're going to be running the aspect of Occult Dominion, and we're looking for Int and Max Life, and ideally you really want a G8 movement speed. Movement speed is an incredibly powerful stat. It's going to let you move out of mechanics faster, it's going to increase your farming speed, it's just going to do so much good stuff for you, and we're also going to be trying to temper on movement speed onto this as well. And by the way, with the tempering, with the utility slot, once you're capped out on Corpse Tendril size, feel free to look for Curse Duration or Decrepify size. Neither of these things are that important or that good, but it's better than nothing. Number one priority is to get to Corpse Tendril's cap. Now, our weapon is interesting. The most important thing on our weapon, by far, is the Skeletal Mage Attack Twice Tempering, and you need to masterwork it if you can. Obviously, when I'm showing you guys my gear is absolutely insane, but I'm telling you guys, this build is still incredible without it. You know I've been playing this build the entire season. I did all my tormented bosses with it, I did all my farming with it, but this build is still very good without the gear, so don't feel like just because my gear is perfect that you need perfect gear to play the build, okay? It's still a very good build without it. But it is very important on your weapon that you get as many masterworks on the Skeletal Mage Attack Twice as possible, because each point of this is just a damage multiplier. It's just a straight up 99% damage multiplier. And remember, this does work with the Skeletal Mage Attack Twice Book of the Dead. So your Skeletal Mages will actually be attacking 4 times whenever both of them proc, which is pretty freaking good, right? And on our weapon, we're looking for Int and Max Life with a crit damage, okay? Crit damage ends up being really good because we get to around 100% crit chance. I'm not quite there yet, but ideally you'd be at 100% crit chance with perfect gear. My gear's not quite perfect. And on the weapon, we're also going to be running the Blighted aspect for a ginormous 240% multiplier. This aspect is broken. Amulet, if you need attack speed on your amulet, feel free to roll it. I don't, so I rolled cooldown reduction instead. Crit chance is also competitive. Honestly, crit chance might be better than cooldown reduction. Basically, crit chance is better in AoE, but cooldown reduction is better for the boss. So this is kind of a tough decision you're going to have to make for which one to go to. I opted for CDR. And then you definitely want Gloom and Ranks of Hellman Commander if you can. Ranks of Hellman Commander is obviously the most important roll on your amulet, followed by Gloom, then followed by either cooldown reduction or crit, or attack speed if you need it. Now, ideally, when you masterwork your amulet, you triple hit Hellman Commander, but, this isn't always going to be the case, right? Then you want ultimate cooldown reduction and skeletal mage damage as well, and of course, we're running the Unyielding Commanders aspect. On our rings, I'm running one ring with a G8 max life. I think you can either roll max life or crit chance on your rings, both are good, but my ring right now is, I have one max life ring and one crit ring. And you can see, Int, max life, attack speed, and then ultimate cooldown reduction and summoning damage. Obvious stuff, right? Really strong. And then this is the Aspect of Frenzied Dead. And then on this amulet, this is Int, attack speed, crit chance. I think probably running the max life on the other ring was probably part of the reason why the 126 was so hard for me. I think if I did a crit chance roll, I would have had a much easier time. But alas, I opted for the max life. And I think for general farming, I would prefer the max life, because this build does still die. And those maximum life rolls really add up. And the crit strike chance, while it is a decent amount of damage, the build doesn't necessarily need it. But it's up to you. If you want to go full damage, go for it. If you want to get the max life rolls, do that instead. And then it's the same kind of ring otherwise, and we're running the Aspect of Grasping Veins. Remember, the crit damage part of Grasping Veins doesn't work. We're just playing it for the 25% crit chance, which it is a bit weird, okay? This aspect is not the best aspect in the game for this build, We just don't really have a better option. But remember, we are running the Iron Golem Sacrifice, and we are getting close to 100% crit chance. So, with all of these multipliers working together, you get the base 50%, you get the additive crit damage, and you're getting this 30%. Crit chance is actually really strong. So the Grasping Veins ends up being pretty decent. Now, for gems, one of the things that we've started doing in the top level pushes is taking off rubies for topaz. This is obviously, as you push the build to its limit, we start dropping as much survivability as we can for damage. But I would generally recommend that you play rubies. But if you do want to push the build to the absolute limit, or if you're just doing tormented bosses or doing Lilith or something, feel free to toss in topaz for a massive damage increase. You get 100 intelligence per topaz. That is crazy, okay? So feel free to use that if you want to. And then for my jewelry and for gems and my jewelry, I'm running 2 resist all and 1 armor gem. And you can see that I am resistance capped even with the 11% Tyrael's Might. And yeah, you can start to see how the build is working. Now, the Book of the Dead, standard stuff still, nothing has changed here. We're running the Reaper's Forming Corpse because they're still going to proc the cooldown reduction, right? This is bugged, and so if you pick the Corpse one, then they're going to get both effects. For the mages, we're running the extra attack, and then for Golem, we're sacrificing the Iron Golem. But in this skill tree, we do have a couple of optimizations since the old build. If you were playing this build, you probably noticed some issues like resource generation, and that those issues have been resolved with the new updated version of the build. So our basic skill doesn't matter, and then we're running Blight for the 20% damage. But remember, Blight is also going to give us more uptime on Blighted in a single target, right? So this is actually a really strong component of the build. Huge multiplier. This is one of the things that Golem can't run, right? This is a big deal for us. 3 points into Huge Flesh for the corpse generation, and then we're going Blood Mist to Dreadful Blood Mist for the 10% crit chance. This crit chance is really strong, and this is going to help us get to crit cap, and you want to basically use your Blood Mist before your big combo in order to get the most damage possible. And what do I mean by the big combo? I'm talking about whenever your Blighted is stacked and you're getting the 240%, and then you pop Army of the Dead to get the Unyielding, and you pop Corpse Tendrils to get Grasping Veins, and then you go in and out of Blood Mist real quick to get the extra 10%. And when all of those things stack up, your mages are hitting for 60 million damage. And each mage is doing that. Each mage is attacking about 2.5 times, or each mage is doing close to 4 attacks per second. Each attack is doing 40 to 50 million damage, sometimes more depending on your gear. And you have 6 mages doing it. The damage is absurd, guys, when you get everything lined up. We're running 3 points into Grim Harvest. This is going to give us a ton of resource generation in single target. One of the things that we do, especially in single target, is we spam Raised Skeleton. The reason we do that is to proc Grim Harvest, and it's also to proc the Flesh Eater Paragon node right here, which is going to give us a 40% damage multiplier after consuming 5 corpses. So in single target, you're going to see people constantly spamming Raised Skeleton, and that is to proc these 2 effects. Now, we're also going Corpse Tendrils with Plague Corpse Tendrils for the vulnerable. We're going into Gloom and grabbing Terror as well for all these damage multipliers. And obviously, Terror is really strong against CC'd enemies, and the CC is applied by Corpse Tendrils. Necrotic Carapace for the infinite Fortified generation because of the amount of corpses we're generating. We're playing Army of the Dead, going all the way to Supreme Army of the Dead. This is something I'm not 100% sold on. It is nice, and basically, the reason why we're doing this now, I think for farming you don't need it, but it's just 1 point, so we might as well. The thing that makes this really good when pushing hard content is it's going to constantly res your skeletons as they die. Remember, we have 100% uptime in Army of the Dead, right? So it's constantly raising skeletons, and those skeletons are constantly getting replaced whenever they die. And so we're able to not put points into Bond and Essence, and this frees up a couple of extra skill points, which is pretty high value. We're also running Inspiring Leader for the crit chance, Hellbent Commander, of course, for the damage multiplier whenever you're close to your minions, and then Shadow Blight for the damage multiplier. Now, there are a couple of things I want to mention about the Paragon board, but we're not going to dwell on this for too long because I do want to talk about the general gameplay and give you guys a couple of tips before we close out here. So for starters, we're playing Amplify for 10% against cursed enemies, Dead Razor because Dead Razor is crazy, Cult Leader for the, massive damage multiplier, Flesh Eater, as I described, right? We're eating corpses as fast as we can to get Flesh Eater up as much as we can. And then there's this interesting choice of Gravekeeper. What this means is we are going to get up to 2% damage multiplier per corpse up to 12%. This means the way we actually want to play this build is we actually want to drag the mages into melee, and then we stand on top of the pile of corpses to get the 12% damage. This is also going to work very well with Death's Embrace, because remember, your mages do 6% more damage whenever they are close to their target. And you can see, why this node is ran. Now, if you don't care too much about it, don't think about it. The build is still really strong. You don't have to worry about it too much. But if you want to take the build with that extra step, feel free to think about your Gravekeeper. Coming over here, we're running Abyssal for 10% damage. And then we are running Control for 20% against crowd-controlled enemies, as well as Scent of Death. And remember, Scent of Death, we've always got the 2 corpses, right? So this is just 15% damage reduction. And then we're coming over here for Essence for crit damage and another multiplier. And then we're grabbing Exploit for some additive damage and damage multiplier. You can see this build is just damage, 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 damage. And it ends up, paying off very well, as you can see from the results. So let's talk a little bit about the general game plan of the build. The basic idea is you just want to keep enemies permanently decrepified. You want to corpse tendrils them into a pile. Then you want to cast Blight onto them. Then you want to stand on top of your skeletal mages and pop Army of the Dead. And then use Blood Mist for the 10% crit chance. And then make sure you always keep up those skeletal priest buff. And that's pretty much it. You just keep up all your stuff. Go into Blood Mist when you need to. When you're outside of Blood Mist, make sure you're spamming Raised Skeleton to prop Corpse Eater. And that's pretty much the build, guys. I love this build. I've been screaming from the top of the mountain this entire season, trying to tell everybody, like, you gotta play mages, you gotta play mages, you gotta play mages. And honestly, I feel a bit vindicated now. The leaderboard is starting to fill up with mage players, and I think more and more people are starting to swap to this build and starting to see how strong it actually is. So I hope you guys try out this build. Let me know what you think of it, and thank you all for watching. Peace.